Hey guys, Rushy here and welcome back to another video. Welcome to an automotive themed video. As many of my subscribers know, I am a car enthusiast. I have been from a very young age, since I was about 4 years old. So long before I was interested in making videos or long before I even knew about YouTube, I've always been interested in different vehicles. Now, I'm not very mechanically minded, I don't have much experience of working on cars or much skill in terms of fixing cars. I'm more interested in sort of like the driving aspects of vehicles and learning more about the history of different vehicles from all over the world, all the way from the dawn of motoring right up until present day. Petrol, diesel, electric, hybrids, you name it, I'm interested in them all. I watch a lot of mechanic content on TV and on YouTube as well. And one trend I've noticed over the past few years that a lot of automotive YouTubers have been doing is providing list videos where they list all the vehicles they've owned over the years. Now, me personally, I've only ever owned one car, so that would be a very short list. But I have driven a few over the years. In this video, I'm going to list all the cars I've driven over the years, what each car was like to drive, what I thought of each car, and the specifications of each vehicle, such as make, model. Okay, so starting from the very beginning, from my first driving experience, as I said, I've been a car enthusiast for most of my life, and I've always been interested in driving. I remember when I was a young kid, wanting to be 17 so I could learn to drive. And I was always interested in the underage driving courses that a lot of driving schools provide, where they teach kids from the age of 11 onwards different driving techniques, give them practice behind the wheel on private land. Unfortunately, I never got to go on one of those courses, but when I was 14, going on 15, back in early 2016, not long before I started this YouTube channel, my cousin, who was about 12 years older than me, he passed his driving test when I was about 12 or 13, and he's a car enthusiast as well. And I remember we always used to play racing games together and stuff. And one day he gave me a quick practice, a driving lesson in his car. So he took me to a secluded industrial estate area. So the car that he let me have a go in was the car he owned at the time, which was a blue Vauxhall Astra diesel. I think it was a 1.7 turbo diesel engine, and I think it was a 2005 car, so it would have been like a fifth generation Vauxhall Astra. It was a 5-door hatchback. So as I got set up in the vehicle, I had never had any driving experience before. I had seen driving related videos on YouTube, but never had any experience. And he taught me how to move the car off from a standstill just by releasing the clutch pedal and then holding it and then releasing it fully, and the car started moving straight away. We managed to change gear into second gear and I accelerated up to 20 miles per hour. I didn't feel comfortable going any faster. It was quite a secluded road, quite a small road in an industrial area, and we actually passed a learner driver in a driving school car coming the other way, so it must have been quite a popular place to learn how to drive. And I was excited. This is my first driving experience. I was a bit nervous as well because it was technically illegal. I was 14 going on 15, but it was quite safe because he was in the passenger seat. My cousin was in the passenger seat, and we went joyriding or anything. We just learned the basics of driving. So I took a couple of turns. I remember shuffling the wheel because that's how I seen how to steer correctly, but I wasn't shuffling it enough, so my cousin helped me. I reversed a little bit, done a 3-point turn. Took me a while, but I done it. And then we came to a junction, so I braked, but because I was so new, I was so green to driving, I didn't realise how sensitive the brake pedal was compared to the other pedals, so I pressed as I did the accelerating clutch and the car grounded straight to a halt, and I didn't engage the clutch either because I didn't know that was what you needed to do in the manual, so the car immediately stalled as well. But yeah, at the time I just couldn't get over how sensitive the brake pedal was, and fair play, that car had really good brakes. So from that point, then I tried starting the car again and moving off, but I stalled every time I did so. So that's when we both decided to call it quits, lesson over with, and then we swapped seats and he drove me home. But yeah, it was a good experience. It was a fun experience. Like I said, I didn't have any prior experience, so it was only natural that I wasn't very skilled behind the wheel because I had no prior experience. And the car itself, I found quite intimidating to drive because of its size. It was a mid-size family car, and the controls felt quite solid, and because of the engine as well, it felt quite powerful. On the flip side, it was quite easy in a way as well. It was quite easy to move off, just using the clutch pedal. I thought that was how all vehicles, all manual cars, moved off, just using the clutch pedal. Boy, was I in for a shock. It felt quite planted on the road and quite well built. And, being a passenger in the car at higher speeds, it felt quite refined and quite quick as well for a diesel. I think the car broke down because I know my cousin used to travel quite long distances to work every day, put a lot of mileage on that car, and it ended up breaking down. I think he managed to get it fixed, but then he sold it on. Unfortunately, I don't have any pictures of that car, and I don't know what happened to it afterwards. I'm not sure if it's still around or if it's been scrapped or whatever. But yeah, that was my first driving experience, and I enjoyed it overall, and that satisfied my urge for driving then. And I didn't drive again until I started taking lessons when I was 18. So moving on to the second car I drove. So this was not long after I turned 18. I got my provisional license, and then on Facebook I seen a driving school advertised. I contacted the driving school. They were offering a deal at the time, 5 hours worth of lessons for £55. So I jumped at the opportunity and I started taking lessons. So yes, we arranged for driving lessons, and my driving instructor, she taught me in a second generation Citroën C1. I actually have a picture of that vehicle, which you'll see now. I think it was a 2015 model. In terms of learning to drive, I wanted to start from scratch, from basic lessons in terms of maneuvering the vehicle, all the way up to practicing different junctions, high speed driving, roundabouts, main roads, side roads, parking maneuvers, all the maneuvers basically. And yeah, I learned a lot in that car, and I actually enjoyed driving that car. It felt very compact. I liked how small it was. I personally prefer small cars to big cars. I found it very easy to park, very easy to maneuver. Yeah, the car had a leather wrapped steering wheel as well, so it felt very nice to handle. It wasn't as intimidating to drive as the Vauxhall because of how small it was, and I think it only had a 1 litre petrol engine, so it wasn't half as powerful, so it didn't feel very intimidating to drive. It felt very easy to control. But on the flip side, it was harder to move off from a standpoint because being a petrol car and low powered, I had to disengage the clutch, hold it at the biting point, but I also had to use the accelerator and balance that accelerator and clutch balance in order to get the car moving. And that was the thing I mainly struggled with in terms of driving. That was the most difficult thing for me, was finding that balance of clutch, biting point and accelerator, and that's something I still struggle with today. And yeah, I enjoyed driving that car. One thing I didn't like was criticism was on the highest speed roads, especially accelerating uphill. I remember in a 40 mile per hour limit on a dual carriageway, and I think I was in fourth gear and accelerating uphill, and the car just wouldn't accelerate. I had my foot flat to the floor, and it was just about maintaining its speed, so it was a bit underpowered. But yeah, I really enjoyed driving that car. And then halfway through my lessons, my instructor, she upgraded her car. So the third car I learned to drive in, with the same driving school, with the same instructor, she upgraded her car, and she upgraded it to a third generation Renault Megane. It was in silver. I think it was a 2016 car. And yeah, it was quite a change from the Citroën C1. It was 2 sizes bigger up, the same class of car as the Vauxhall Astra. And it was diesel as well, so it was the same in that way. But unfortunately, it wasn't as easy to move off as the Vauxhall. I still had to use the gas when moving off in that car. It was easy to move off in the Citroën, but not as easy as the Vauxhall. And it took me a while to get used to that car because of its dimensions. It was a bigger car, and I preferred driving small cars, so I found it a bit more intimidating to learn in. And yeah, I liked that car. I think it was the most modern car I've driven, and it was quite advanced as well. Instead of a key, it had a card system and a start button. So it was quite modern, and it had a 6-speed gearbox as well. So it was quite refined. It was more refined than Citroën, more powerful, and it was more refined on the motorway as well. And at this point, when I was learning to drive, learner drivers became allowed to learn on motorways. So I had a motorway lesson in that car, which I enjoyed. One thing I really liked about it was that it had a digital speedometer. So I found it having a digital speedo more accurate and more easy to stick to speed limits and control my speed than with the analog system. And that was the car I ended up passing my driving test in. I passed first time with 5 minors. Okay, moving on to the fourth car I drove. Now, this was several months, about 6 months after I passed my test, because, like I said, even though I was learning to drive and I passed my driving test, I couldn't afford a car at the time, and I passed at the end of February in 2020. I was lucky, really. I passed about 3 weeks before they started cancelling tests due to the coronavirus. I didn't need to drive at that time because I didn't go many places because of the lockdown. I didn't need to go to college because at that time we were learning from home. I wasn't in work at the time, and everything I done was local. I only travelled locally, and I was familiar with public transport, so I didn't need to drive at the time, and so I didn't drive for about 6 months after I passed my test. And then I think it was July of 2020. And then my other cousin, shout out to him because I know he used to watch my YouTube videos, so shout out Ethan if you're watching. He's a year younger than me, and he passed his test a month before I did when he was 17. But he got his car straight away, so he started driving straight away. So he had about 6 months more experience than I did. And at this point, this was after the first lockdown, but before the second lockdown. I'd saved up enough money to buy a car, and because we were out of lockdown, we were able to travel more, so I thought it made sense to buy a car now. But because I hadn't had any experience for 6 months, I wanted a bit of practice before I started looking for a car to buy. And fair play to him, my cousin, he gave me practice in his car in an industrial car park. So the car he had, the car he gave me practice in was a Citroën C1, but it was the first generation, the older model to the one I learned to drive in. I'm not sure what year it was, but I think it was a late model because it had the facelift front end on it. It was the 3-door in black. And yeah, I enjoyed driving that car. It was similar to the other Citroën C1 I learned to drive in. I liked how small it was. It felt very easy to control. It didn't feel intimidating to drive whatsoever. It was slow, but it was nippy. It felt easy to drive, but at the same time, it was more difficult than the diesels because it was more difficult to move off. But apart from that, it felt very easy to control, and I really enjoyed driving it. And, it did make sense as a very good first car, and it was really practical for its size. I sat at the back of it and I had plenty of leg room. And yeah, my cousin, he gave me some very helpful tips, in terms of driving, when to change gear and stuff that I'd learned, but some stuff I'd forgotten over time. Now, moving on to the fifth car I drove, and that was the car I bought, my first car. So this was about a couple of weeks after I had that practice lesson with my cousin, and the car I ended up buying was my Renault Clio, my 2006 Renault Clio. I paid £650 for it, which was the full asking price. So, it had done 136,000 miles at that time and had 9 previous owners, so it was well used. It had a few issues, but it was quite well looked after as well. And yeah, that's when I started driving then, when I was 19, not long after my 19th birthday. And yeah, I drove that car without any issues for a year. And yeah, it was a great first car. It was a subcompact car, so it was a bit bigger than the Citroëns, but not as big as the Vauxhall or the Renault, and it was really practical car for its size. And those Mark III Clios, I really liked the design of them, and I thought it looked excellent. It had the slowest, least powerful engine, the 1.2 litre non-turbo petrol, which was ideal for me because it was the cheapest engine to insure, and it was quite really economical as well. I got an average of 40 miles per gallon. And yeah, that car served me very well for over a year. And then last September, just before I moved to university, it developed a fault. I think it needs a new wheel bearing, and pricing up how much it would cost to run, how much it would cost for an MOT, because it needed a few things doing to it. I decided to leave it at home whilst I moved to Preston, because it would cost too much to run, and I wouldn't use it much up here anyway, because everything up here is local to where I am living in my student accommodation. So I wouldn't use the car much, and it would cost me quite a lot to keep on the road. So I thought it wasn't worth it, so I parked it up at home. And that's where it's been for, God, nearly 10 months now. So the plan is for me to hopefully, after next month, after I move home from university, get that car back on the road and continue using it. I did film a walk around video of the car last year, so feel free to check that out on my channel. I'll leave a link to that video in the description. But yeah, it was really fun to drive car. Not very powerful, but quite nippy. And, you know, it felt a bit more intimidating to drive than the little Citroëns, because it was a bit bigger and a little bit more powerful, but not as intimidating as the Vauxhall or the Renault Megane. One thing I didn't like about it though was being a petrol, low powered. It needed acceleration as well as clutch to move off, and also the clutch biting point is very high. And I don't think that was unique to that car. I think all of the Renault Clios and a lot of French cars, the clutch biting point is very high. Now me personally, I prefer a lower biting point for the clutch. I find it easier to control. But yeah, apart from that, you know, it was quite fun to drive and easy to control. And finally, moving on to the sixth car I've driven. So up here in Preston, so I hadn't driven from September last year till March this year, which is about 5 months. And I wanted some practice, you know, for when I came home and started driving again, because I hadn't driven in a while. And I also wanted to learn things I hadn't learned from my first instructor when driving. So I got in touch with a local driving school, and we arranged to have some refresher lessons. And the car my instructor drove, which I ended up driving, was a 2014 Toyota Yaris. It was a 5-door model, and it was a 1.3 petrol, and I have a couple of photos of that car which I'll show now. You know, I like driving this vehicle. It felt a bit more intimidating to drive than the little Citroëns, but not as intimidating as the Renault Megane and the Vauxhall, because it was the same size as my Clio, and similar size engine, similar power, petrol. One thing I noticed though, being a modern car, is that you had to press the clutch in order to start the engine, which caught me out a couple of times. You know, it was quite modern, you know, it had a touch screen. It was easy to drive, you know, it was quite easy to maneuver, but at the same time, I think it was the most difficult car I've driven. In order to start, it was quite easy to stall. But because I'd had more driving experience and I passed my test for over a year at this point, I had better skill at, you know, clutch control, but that was still an area I needed work on. But yeah, I learned, you know, I relearned everything I'd learned before, practiced everything I learned, and learned a few more things as well from my instructor, because he came from a school. He had a lot of detail. He had a driving book with a lot of detail about each lesson, and it was really professional. I'm glad. I think I had about 12 lessons, and I'm glad I had those lessons, because I feel I'm a better driver now than I was before. Not only did I relearn things that I forgot, but I learned more things I'd never learned before. And in terms of driving the car, it felt very planted on the road, very solid build quality. Like I said, it was easy to stall, and the steering had quite a bit of weight to it, but not too heavy. It felt very solid, it felt very planted, not very quick, although it was quite nippy, but not very quick. And it didn't feel very fun to drive, but it felt very safe and predictable and controllable to drive, you know, very sensible. And yeah, it was very practical for its size. And yeah, I enjoyed driving that car, and I learned a lot more about driving from driving that car and my instructor. So that's all the cars I've driven, guys. I've driven 6 cars in total. So it hasn't been much variety, you know, all the cars have been front wheel drive, all hatchbacks, 2 diesels, 4 petrols, 2 city cars, the Citroëns, 2 subcompact super mini cars, my Renault Clio and the Toyota Yaris, and 2 compact family hatchback cars, the Renault Megane and the Vauxhall Astra. Out of the 6 cars I've driven, 4 of them have been French, you know, both Citroëns and both Renaults. The Vauxhall, I don't know whether I class as British because it's a British brand. I'm not sure if it was built in Britain, but I think it was designed in Germany by Opel, so I class that as British/European. And the Toyota, which was Japanese. In terms of driving, my favourite to drive would have been the Citroën C1 that I learned to drive in from my driving instructor, because it felt very easy and safe to control and unintimidating to drive, and it was, you know, a bit more modern than the other Citroën C1 I learned to drive in, and it had a nice leather steering wheel as well. They've all been modern. I haven't driven an old car really. I think the oldest I drove was my cousin's Vauxhall Astra, which was a 2005 model. I think the most modern car I've driven was the Renault Megane, which is a 2016. But yeah, I enjoy driving all of them, all 6 of them. You know, I'm willing to drive any car, but I'd like to drive, you know, loads of different vehicles in the future. And, you know, I'd like to go to an event, you know, one day maybe drive a supercar. That'd be awesome. So that concludes this video, guys. I hope you found it informative, interesting. As you know, I like to cover a lot of different types of content on this channel. And, you know, I am a car enthusiast, so I thought I'd make an automotive themed video, my first this year. Feel free to let me know how many cars you've driven in the comment section, and I've got some big plans for the future as well. I'm going to continue with monthly uploads, and unfortunately this is actually going to be the last video I film in my student accommodation, because I'll be moving home within the next week or so. So with that being said, thank you all for watching, take care, and I'll see you all next month in my next video.